Good morning. Welcome again to Morning Devotions, and thank you so much for our time together. Tonight and tomorrow, all day, in all of our services and all campuses, I'm going to be teaching you about how to calm your mind after the doctrinal bullies confuse you, cause your mind to be troubled, as James, the half-brother of Jesus, says there in Acts 15. So I'll look forward to spending that time with you. But right now, let's turn our attention back to Galatians chapter 2. I want to take one of those obscure thoughts, if you will. I mean, most of the book of Galatians is very easy. It's chapter 2 here is some of our favorite, most often quoted verses about the life I live in the body. I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me. And I mean, all these wonderful verses that we've memorized all of our lives. But let me pull out a little verse that meant something to me today. In verse 7, on the contrary, they saw that I had been enriched with the task of preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, just as Peter had been to the Jews. For God, who was at work in the ministry of Peter as an apostle to the Jews, was also at work in my ministry as apostle to the Gentiles. God, who was at work in my ministry. God, who was at work in the ministry of the apostle Peter. And here's my question. Who's at work in your ministry? Oh, Pastor Samuel, I don't have a ministry. I'm just a Christian. No. Paul teaches us very clearly that each one of us have been given the ministry of reconciliation. Now, who is at work in that ministry of reconciliation? Is it just you? Is it you just doing a technique or a branding that you learned, a little spiel that you learned? Or is God at work in your ministry? When you sit down and you begin to talk to somebody about Jesus Christ, is God at work in your ministry? When you lay hands and pray for the sick, is God at work in your ministry? When you sit down as a Connect Group leader and begin to teach people the Bible, is God at work in your ministry? See, we can either do things completely on our own, or we can watch God work with us. Now, that's just a beautiful thought for me today, and something I've been meditating on all day. God at work in my ministry. That as I sit down to minister to other people, God is at work. I don't want it to be a spiel that somebody else taught me, so some branding is at work in my ministry. I don't want it to be some memorized thing so that it's just my soul and I'm doing this in my own strength. I want to live a life that when I sit down to minister, it may not be fancy, it may not be flashy, it may not be with absolutely correct PowerPoints and perfect articulation and enunciation, but God is at work in my ministry.